When you want to manage access to objects stored in S3 and consumed in tools like SageMaker or EMR, you typically work with IAM policies. Now, if you work with IAM policies, you might hit limitation scale. For example, policy size limitations or management limitations, where ownership typically lives with a central team. To work around those limitations, AWS introduced S3 access grants and IAM Identity Center. Immuta helps even further by allowing you to dynamically control access to objects in S3 by leveraging those features. In today's demo, I will show how Immuta can help control access to data consumed by service accounts or roles in an EMR job, but also how individual users can use serverless EMR and notebooks to consume the data. With the right controls, you can allow more users to consume more data faster, while keeping control and not oversharing. Here you can see the S3 interface, where you can see I have a bucket. In that bucket, I've created a prefix, and in this prefix, you can see 3 different folders. I have the customers and the orders folder. Both folders contain a CSV file with customers and orders data. And I want to use EMR in this demonstration to join those 2 data sets and do some data processing to create an orders by customer object. And this will be stored in Parquet. Now, this Parquet data set, I want to give to my data science team, for example, and I allow them to run machine learning models on top of them to, for example, do churn prediction. I have already registered the different data sources in S3 in Immuta, and you can see them listed in here. I've also tagged them and labeled them. And this is important because Immuta uses those labels to dynamically provision the right level of access to the different users. So for example, if I go to this orders by customer object, you can see that I labeled this data set as the customer sales data product, and it's also in the gold data stage. If I would go to another object, for example, this full data sets prefix, you can see this is in the bronze data stage. On top of the tags and the attributes in Immuta, I can define policies, and it's the policies that will actually grant the right access to the right users. And I've already prepared that. So what you can see is I have a policy that gives data scientists read access to a specific data product, in this case, the customer's data set. And I also have a policy that allows the service account to write in the bronze layer. And if I click on that, you can see more details. I have onboarded a couple of users in Immuta. You can see that I have a data scientist user and a workload service role user created. And if I go on those individual objects, you can see that I have mapped this user to an IAM role. So everything that I provisioned to this user in Immuta is actually being provisioned to this specific role in S3 access grants. And what you can see is that Immuta already pushed that. So if I go to the access grants and I look at the details, you can see that the full data sets prefix was given read-write permission to the EC2 workload role. That's the role I'm using in EMR to process the data. And then more specifically, the orders by customer object has been given read access to this serverless data scientist role. So like an individual analyst querying this data. And that's how Immuta is pushing the right grants to EMR. I have already provisioned a cluster in EMR on EC2. And when I configured it to use the S3 access grants. So if a job will be processed on this cluster, it's using the access grants to get the token to connect to S3. The jobs I've configured in a step in this case. And you can see that I have 2 steps and the first one failed. Now the first one failed because I didn't give it a role to be used. So EMR was not able to pull the right credentials to execute this job. But the second time it was completed, and I've used this like bar TMR EC2 workload role to consume it. Now this Python job is just like pulling those 2 CSV files, doing some grouping, processing, and write it down. But let's have a closer look at this like workload role. So as you can see, this role only has 2 permission scopes. The first one is some artifact access, and that's access to S3, but just to an artifacts bucket. That's where my Python script is stored. It's not where the data actually is. The other permission that this role has is the get data access permission. So this allows the job to go to get S3 access grants and pull the right credential. Hence, it's also using the Immuta policies and the rules that I've defined there to consume that data. And that's why this job was successful. I can not only use S3 access grants and Immuta to protect roles that are running big data processing jobs in EMR, but with the right controls now, I can allow individual data scientists or end users also to get access to S3 consumed to EMR. So what I have here is I have an EMR serverless application, and in there I've told it to use this like data scientist role. Now this data scientist role only has access to that golden layer, doesn't have access to the bronze layer and directly access to the CSV file. So as a data scientist, if I try to read that like order CSV file, I actually get an error. Like S3 access grant is unable to give you the right access because this data scientist is not given access. But if I now try to read the orders by customer, like the golden layer, I can see that I have access to run a query against this data set. And now as a data scientist, I can do whatever I need to do with this data set. So I can, for example, run Spark SQL queries against this to better understand if a campaign is actually increasing revenue. So I can see that like if I run a campaign against a customer, like the average sum of revenue for that customer is almost doubling. But I can also use it for churn, advanced machine learning, you name it.